The Parsha of Toldos is an extremely exciting one. It's part of Sefer Bereshis, which is exciting in and of itself in each and every Parsha. But the Parsha of Toldos describes the story of the birth of Esav and Yaakov. And we have these two warring factions, two brothers, twins no less, born to the same parents, educated by the same parents. We have the struggle between good and bad, between light and dark, between Yaakov Avinu, the Ish Tam, Yoshev Ohalem, and Esav, who is the Ish Tzayid, Ish Sodeh. Such a difficult thing to deal with. And ultimately, the story ends with Esav seeking to kill his brother Yaakov Avinu, given the fact that Yaakov has stolen the brachos meant to be given by Yitzchak to Esav. And he's sent away by his father and mother to find for himself a shidduch and to escape the wrath of Esav. And yet there are so many understandable, problematic questions that need to be raised. How was Esav so different from Yaakov? Twins, and so opposite in nature. Moreover, Yitzchak Avinu, that set Tomim, as it were, that Ayil Tomim, that perfect carbon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the embodiment of Gvura, of self-discipline, of all people, he, the son of Avram Avinu, he who underwent the Akedas Yitzchak, favors Vayehav Yitzchak as Esav. He favors Esav. He wants to give him the bracha. How is that possible? And the fact that Rivka never explained to Esav that she was given through the good agency of Shem, the understanding provided by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that she would have twins who would be polar opposites. And so she wasn't so much confused as she was alarmed at the ultimate different paths that would be chosen. And yet she never shared it with Yitzchak. Listen to the following pasuk that I think might shed a tremendous amount of light upon what we have said. Vayetar Yitzchak l'Adonai l'nochach ishto. Rivka is barren. And Yitzchak and Rivka have been married for 20 years and she can't give birth. And they daven rigorously. Ki akarahi. She is barren, unable to have a child. Vayasar lo Adonai and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In this room where Yitzchak and Rivka are standing in separate diagonal corners, opposite one the other, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hearkens to the prayers of Yitzchak, who's toiling so diligently and vigorously to overturn the greater desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, to grant Rivka a child. Vatah Rivka ishto, and Rivka, his wife, gives birth. And the word ishto, wife, is obviously superfluous. It could have just said and should have just said Vatah Rivka. Why Vatah Rivka ishto? And suggests about Laturim, ishto bigamatria, ishto numerically is equal to kash ve'esh, to stubble and to fire. And we long know, based upon the pasuk in Ovadia, that ultimately there will be the understanding that will be resolved at the end of time with the coming of Mashiach, that V'hoya Beis Yaakov Eish, at the house of Yaakov will be that of fire, Ubeis Esav Lakash, and the house of Esav, the twin brother, will be that of stubble. And at the end of time, ultimately, after these warring parties have been at loggerheads for millennia, the house of Esav will be consumed. Suggested about Haturim, that's why it doesn't simply say that Rivka became pregnant, but Rivka, his wife, became pregnant. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Baal HaTurim is telling us as follows. When Rivka is told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the runnings within her stomach when she passes a shul versus when she passes a Beis Akum is explained by the fact that she has two very different individuals within her womb who will emanate from the womb going their separate ways, and they will be great, great governing parties of legions. They will be great kings, but one will never rise without the lowering of the other. And there will be this constant struggle. And she knows it, and she accepts it, and she moves on. And we always assume that Yitzchak is unknowing of this. And yet he somehow shockingly favors Esav. Well, according to the Baal HaTurim, perhaps Esav understood that his struggle in convincing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to finally grant a child to his beloved wife Rivka was based upon the fact that it was Rivka Ishto. It wasn't simply Rivka to whom he was married, it was Rivka Ishto, whom Yitzchak understood would ultimately potentially give birth not simply to a child, finally granted the continuity for the Avos and Imos HaKadoshim, but rather it would be two children. And they would not simply be polar opposites, but they would be lifelong enemies, one pitched against the other. The difference between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba, the difference between good and evil, the difference between Avodas Hashem, prima facie, and the negation of every word for which HaKadosh Baruch Hu stands. One would be Eish, the other would be Kash. And even though Yitzchak understood that ultimately the two would not be able to coexist with ease, or perhaps not at all, and nonetheless he turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he pours out his heart. And God listens to him with Yitzchak fully understanding that the granting of a child, thus children, to his beloved wife Rivka would be Ishto, one a Yaakov and one an Esav. And never would the twain meet at a common point. And yet he davens nonetheless, and he implores and supplicates Ribono Shel Olam nonetheless. And she's granted the children. Vayahav Yitzchak es Esav. Yitzchak understood fully well why God did not want to grant her a child, but ultimately gives in to the heartfelt pleas of Yitzchak, with Yitzchak understanding that there will be inner turmoil and outward turmoil through the history of the two. But he accepts it, and he accepts it with a gratitude to the Borei Olam, and he accepts it with a determination to go ahead and to love that Esav, that child, as it were, even more, because he would require greater work. Yaakov would be the Ishtam Yoshev Oholim. Yitzchak would require endless attention, endless love, endless looking away, endless kirov to be brought near. But he's willing to fight and to daven for that nonetheless. Vaye'aser lo Adonai, v'ata Rivka ishto. Perhaps Yitzchak needed not the explanation granted to Rivka because he knew it fully well when he was davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he accepted it fully nonetheless. And therefore, indeed, as it were, he favored Yitzchak because Esav required so much more work and so much more patience and so much more tears and so much more continual davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that things could somehow turn out right. Vaye'aser lo, v'ata Rivka ishto. Maybe it's not such an impossible story to understand. Of course, we're dealing with Yitzchak, the embodiment of Gevurah, of self-discipline, of the acceptance of the greater will of the Almighty, that at times in life, not simply momentarily need one be an Akedah on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, giving one's life up to Hashem Yisbarach, but looking at one's family each and every day of one's years granted by the Ribono Shel Olam, and realizing that the work cut out for him was so onerous and so difficult and so painful and so unlike his own upbringing and his own self, but nonetheless a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Another way to think about the Parsha. Have a good Shabbos.